Hey everyone, the topic of this video is hearing God and being obedient. I uh I have learned in my walk that hearing God can really guide us through, the hard issues that we're dealing with. God can see the bigger picture. He can see more than what we can see. Like somebody that's in a helicopter, they can guide somebody that's, on the ground of where to go. And, like another example is in the Matrix, where Morpheus was guiding Neo. Morpheus could see everything, and Neo had to trust Morpheus, and he didn't. And, the result of it was being caught by the agents and having a bug placed in him. So I have learned in my walk that, God can see everything, God can guide us, but, what really stops us is us. And there's so many other things that I will be getting into regarding that. But hearing God is so very important. God knows what's going to happen. And so he's the one that can lead us in our decisions if we're so willing to trust him. So, as I said in a few videos, is that, being on this dating site has really taught me so much. And so I had once seen a profile by somebody that said, you got to hear God. And I was amazed at that. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And so God spoke up at that moment and he says, what about obedience? We can hear God all day, but if we're not obedient to what he says, then we're like Saul. You know, he kept back some of the spoil, and he kept uh Agag alive, and I believe that's what his name was. And this guy killed everyone. And God wanted Saul to wipe everyone off, to destroy everyone, but he didn't do so. And Samuel said obedience is better than sacrifice. And so hearing God is important, but also we have to do what God says. What if we're driving one day and we see somebody and God says, I want you to go to talk to them? Would you do it? And what would stop us is, oh man, this is really weird. I don't want to look foolish. And so that could stop us from doing what God wants us to do. But obedience is important. We have to do what God says. So how many heard God but didn't obey? We have examples like Jonah. He wanted him to go speak at Nineveh, but Jonah ran away. And so a fish caught him and he learned that he had to. We have Adam and Eve who sinned. You can eat of every tree, but except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Well, what did they do? They ate of the tree. And the result was sin that we're dealing with. We have Saul, which I just gave an example of. We have David with Bathsheba. God could have given him more wives if he so desired. But if anything, he took Uriah's wife as his own and had Uriah killed. And then he took a census later on. And the result of it was, destruction. And then finally, we have Abraham, where, time took a toll on both him and Sarah. And so what happened was Sarah pushed Abraham to go with Hagar, and the result was Ishmael. And so the painful part of that for Abraham was having to send Ishmael away. So we could see through these examples the importance of not only hearing God, but with its counterpart, obeying what God says. And if we don't obey what God says, then we're going to suffer the consequences of that. Now, when we hear God and are obedient, there is a joy in that. We can share that joy with people. And it's like a badge of honor, that joy that we feel it's so worth it. That we could say, well, we heard God and this is what God has done. But when we don't follow through with obedience, then all we're going to share is, man, and then that question that really hurts is, what if? What if I would have obeyed and did it? And believe me, if anybody has done that, I am not bringing shame whatsoever to you. I have also made the same mistakes, and I wasn't obedient, and I suffered with that. But when we hear God and we can share that obedience with people, the result of it can be such a great testimony. And I have other examples I have shared in my videos about, hearing God's voice and being guided by him. And, the result of it was an apartment that he had blessed me with. And I don't want to get into detail. I don't want to make this video any longer. But if you watch my other videos, I speak about them. I speak about those examples, and it's to encourage my hearers. And there was another example where my car, stopped on the road, and God said he would provide. And the result of it was that he did provide. So with those examples, I was obedient to what God told me to do. And the result of it was the testimonies I can share with you. Now, when we are not obedient, we suffer. And I had learned the hard way. God gave me instructions about a certain thing in the past, and I didn't listen to him. I didn't heed those instructions. And the result of it was I suffered. Now, I already spoke about Abraham and not being obedient to what God had said. And the result was with Ishmael. Now, what could stop us from obedience? I've learned in my own life that it could be fear. It could be worldly desires. God wants you to go to another country, but you won't do so because you're afraid of losing your apartment or your house. You're afraid of losing your finances. There could be many reasons. Maybe God wants you to trust him, and so you have to give up your job to do so. And a lot of people wouldn't because of fear. And worldly desires. What about the man that was rich? Jesus wanted him to follow him, but the man didn't. And how, did he have regret? It said that he went away sad. Did he kick himself for not being obedient to Jesus? What could make us fear is what people would say if we're obedient. The criticism, the ridicule, would that stop us from obedience? Finances, and then the love of this world could stop us from being obedient with God. Now, if you hear God personally, have you been obedient to him? And the question is, if not, what could you do to be obedient to God? So this video is short, and I hope that it was to the point, and we're in this walk together, and it's not about what we do or what we want anymore. What matters is hearing God and following his instructions and being obedient to what he says. And we really want a testimony to tell people. We want to tell people about what God can do. And we can do so when we're obedient to his voice. We can hear God all day, but obedience is tied to that. So I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you for taking the time to watch.